I'm Julian Harty. My job title is a made-up one, tester at large, and the company I'm working for is eBay. Testing is to enable us to prove or disprove claims, and the claims may or may not be explicit. So someone may claim that the software will work under the following conditions for the following type of user. So for instance, if I go to an auction site, I should be able to place a bid on the item, and if I'm the highest bidder, then I should be the highest bidder and the system should recognize me as such. So that's a claim. And then we might want to test that hypothesis or idea to make sure it actually holds true. And we will want to test both the positive aspects of it, which is when I do the actions that we've been asked to do, such as I am the highest bidder, I expect to see that I'm the highest bidder, but I also want to test other behaviors, such as what happens if I'm not the highest bidder. I should see the other path through the system, which is probably equally important, which may say, you've been outbid, do you want to bid again? So it's looking for those characteristics. And it's also then being observant for possible undesirable side effects. This is a very broad term, but often we observe things which aren't what we're specifically looking for. So we're looking for, do I see my name as the highest bidder and the bid price being the correct value? But we may observe that the picture didn't display properly. Now, is this desirable? No, it's not, because it means the user's more likely to be confused or unhappy, or even simply they view that the site isn't a very reliable site. So it's undesirable, therefore we want to flag that and try to address it. I'm not sure I'm very good at structure. However, I can give some suggestions. So one is to understand how one designs experiments, because without being able to design an experiment, it's very easy to go astray in the process of testing. So let's imagine that I ask someone off the street to come and test our software. They may or may not understand how it works. Let's assume that they have a vague idea of how an auction site works. And they would then navigate through the site, and then they may say, yeah, I'm happy with it. But there hasn't been much rigor in the process. So typically in testing, we need to know the sort of things we want to measure. We need to make sure that we can design the test so we can access the data that we believe we want to use. We need to construct the test so that it's the correct environment. So for instance, it's connected to the database that we want to use rather than perhaps a dummy database. We then need to make sure that when we execute the test, we cope with any problems that occur during the test. We now have to look at the results, make sure we've got valid results, analyze them correctly, and then present the information correctly. If we fail at any point or in multiple points in this step, then the results that we present are erroneous and likely to be misleading. So let's imagine that I'm a very convincing person. So I go out and I say, I've tested the site and I absolutely believe it works. And you think, well, he sounds convincing, he seems to be an expert in the testing community, so it must be good to go. But if I haven't actually applied the design of experiments, then I could be misleading you and misleading myself, and perhaps we have a big fiasco on our hands if we put the software into production now. Conversely, we may have someone who's very quiet, but they're actually correct. They follow the correct process, they've done a correct analysis, but someone shouted them down in a meeting, and so meekly and humbly they went back to their desk, not realizing that actually they had the key to how the system behaved. So I look for design of experiment. I look for a willingness to understand the underlying technology. So in my experience and from working with many people in the testing communities, unless we understand how the application is built up, so whether it's HTML and JavaScript, whether it's a native Android application, etc., we're likely to miss some sorts of problems that we would detect if we had that additional skill and additional experience. So it's being able to understand the domain, both in the technical domain and also the business domain. Again, if we're looking at auction sites, if I understand how auctions work and how bids work, chances are I'm going to be a more effective tester than someone who comes into the role cold, never having understood this before. It's not to say that naivety isn't useful, but naivety only helps in addition to having this rigor. So perhaps I might get a naive user to walk me through the site and describe it to me. I might ask them questions and say, can you tell me what you can do with this site? So we do some sort of talk aloud protocol. But it's working in conjunction with someone who has the knowledge and expertise and the rigor. So it's these sort of things I look for. And then being able to communicate. So for testers, if we're not able to communicate effectively, then we're unlikely to be effective. And this is written communication, perhaps it's a bug report, perhaps it's an assessment that we write, perhaps it's the data we present, perhaps it's a PowerPoint that we suffer. So it's these sort of communications, the people-to-people communications, that are so important Testers don't create much. They observe, they're critics, and so they have to be able to criticize effectively and not annoy people to the point where people stop listening to the message because they don't like the way it's being presented. So I recognize there's a big difference between perfection and good enough. And good enough is a relative term. So it may be good enough for you, but not good enough for me, for instance. So I'm looking for good enough results rather than perfection in the work we do. Otherwise, we get to the point of impracticality. So we start chasing our tails, trying to get the system totally accurate. But accurate isn't important beyond a certain level, perhaps. So my advice would be find ways to do enough testing to be helpful. Try to focus on doing the right sort of testing that is more likely to give results that are meaningful and useful. So for instance, I probably wouldn't spend all my days just looking for one type of JavaScript bug, because once we know there are JavaScript bugs, we can classify them and group them and say, there are likely to be more JavaScript bugs. Here are some I've found as examples. Why don't we clean those ones up and then we'll address the rest of them. Now let's move on to the next part of testing, which may be the usability testing. So I want to spend my time between these different aspects. And when managing a testing team, in terms of the people's work, it will be helping people to understand there are different viewpoints and different facets of testing and encouraging people to do several of these. There's much, much more to test management or managing testers than that, but just to give you some brief answer. Yeah, I believe it's very hard to separate the improvement in quality from the person who produces the work. So if the person who produces the work is unwilling to test their work, then they may be generating wonderful code. Chances are they aren't, but they may be. They may be the 0.1% of people who can do that. But they may be generating a lot more downstream work for other people, including the end users, than we otherwise realize. So I'm a strong believer in the person who creates should test their work. Now, when we test our own work, we will be blind to some aspects, perhaps about half the work. So that's where we involve other people to help us give a fresh perspective. Now, some of these people might be other developers. So they understand the programming language, they understand the language constructs, perhaps concurrency in Java, for example. They look at our code and say, looks like the way you've implemented this isn't ideal. Have you thought about using this technique? And because they are experts in this domain, in the programming language domain, then I'll trust their words and together we can work through and improve the software. But I may also want someone who's a user experience expert, or even someone who understands user experience well, and they can give me a fresh perspective on my work and say, by the way, perhaps you aren't aware, but if I navigate through this with the keyboard, I get stuck at a certain point. Are you aware of that? And I say, oh, no, I wasn't. Thank you very much for telling me this. So I can then go and fix the problems. And I think one of the challenges is not who does the work, because in practice many people test, but how can we shorten the feedback loops and increase the communication? So perhaps that's as simple as videoing the testing, so we can produce a video that shows how we navigated through the website, rather than trying to remember dimly in our brains what we did. So it's shortening the feedback loop and increasing the communications that really helps, and absolutely the people who create the software, which includes the designers, so people working on paper and doing sketches and wireframes, also should be responsible. But we need to do this in order to improve the software. The first thing is I see lots of testing or development that's called agile that seems to be far from the practices and the vision of the people who created the term and coined the term. So it's a nice buzzword to have, and it's a bit like structured. So we're now doing structured programming, we're now doing functional programming. But look at the practices and then try to reflect from the practices and see if, when I describe the practices I observe, whether that happens to be even close to the terms that agile defines. If they are similar, then perhaps we're on something that looks like an agile development process. And in that case, one of the key factors would be the peer relationship between the people. So it's not that I'm the master and you're the slave, or the master and the servant, or the senior programmer and the junior programmer, but that we're collaborating and we have different strengths to bring to this. And people whose primary focus is testing can help to provide a fresh perspective, including asking the sometimes awkward what-if questions. I'll refer you to someone called Philip Armour's work and the 5 orders of ignorance. And this is a very nice concept that helps us to understand a little bit more about how we approach these sort of problems. So 5 orders of ignorance starts with 0 orders of ignorance. We know the question and we know the answer. So this, in testing terms, might be as simple as saying, when I type in a valid username and password, I should log in successfully. This is trivial to test and probably can be automated. It isn't really a key facet of a human being. It's not what I see as a strength of them to test this. We then have one order of ignorance. We know the question, but we don't know the answer. And this is typically where we're working at development. We know the problem we need to solve, we just don't know how to solve it yet. We write code and we solve it. We move on to two orders of ignorance, which is where we don't know the questions and we don't know the answers. So we need to identify the questions to ask. And in this case, in software testing, we need to work out what questions we want to ask the software to understand its behavior. And that's where testers fit quite well. The testing mindset fits quite well. And then if we go to three orders of ignorance, we realize we haven't got a method to identify the questions. So we have three levels before we can get to the answer. And the fourth order of ignorance is we don't even understand this process. So for testers, if they're able to contribute at level 2, they understand how to ask the questions, they understand the structures, a bit like the design of experiments, then chances are they'll be productive and useful members of the team.